Good morning, and welcome to the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast, March 25th, 2024, episode 117, a podcast by a dreamer for dreamers. The stand-up comedian, actor, and improviser, Paul Green, sharing my journey as a dreamer in this crazy world, trying to find my way and sharing my journey as it happens in real time. So, yesterday I did my open mic. I say my open mic because I created it about 5 months ago. I partnered up with a local improv theater called the Neighborhood Comedy Theater, or NCT for short, in downtown Mesa, Arizona. And I spoke to the owner there about starting an open mic. And it's a very specific format of open mic. And the format, by the way, I totally stole it. I did not come up with it by any stretch of the imagination. But it was this format that blew up in Los Angeles when I lived there about 4 or 5 years ago. And the format is ultimately, it's a pay-to-play open mic format, and ultimately the founder, if you will, or at least who I know of the founder, or who I think was the founder. I don't know if he got the idea from someone else. A comedian named Joe Menente, who's a friend of mine still to this day, although I haven't caught up with him in a while. But ultimately, what he did is he took everything that comics hate about open mics. And just the reality is, when you're a stand-up comedian and you are new, or even, actually doesn't matter how new you are. If you're a stand-up comedian and you're not famous, or you're not like a regular already at one of the big comedy venues in Los Angeles, the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, Hollywood Improv. Like, those are sort of the three flagship comedy theaters, and then there's a couple more sort of maybe one level down, or maybe not. Maybe the Ice House is up there, and then there's a bunch of other comedy theaters that maybe aren't as iconic, but are still pretty big. But ultimately, if you're not a regular at one of those, and even to be a regular at one of those, you have had to have really grinded hard for a long time. But anybody who's not that, if you want to practice your art, you need to go to open mics, even if you are a seasoned comic. Again, if you don't have a connection to get on one of those stages in front of paid audiences, you're doing open mics to some degree or another. And almost every open mic is just abysmal in some way or the other. They are not comic friendly. Because again, it's amateur. It's, well, first of all, there's almost never an audience at these open mics, because who wants to go hear a bunch of amateur comics, especially in Los Angeles, when they can pay a couple bucks and go up the street and see famous A-list comedians any given night of the week. And so what happens with these open mics is the formats are just horrible. So there's a couple of types of open mics. The first one is going to be your lottery mic. So a lottery mic means you show up as a comic, you literally write your name down on a little piece of paper, they have a bucket, you throw your name in there, and then you sit and you wait and hope that whoever's hosting the open mic will reach in and pull your name out. And those open mics can sometimes go as long as 3 hours. So you could literally just be sitting there in a room, hoping, wishing, praying that your name gets drawn. And then you go up there and you'll usually get maybe 3 minutes of comedy, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, depending on the open mic. The Laugh Factory is even worse. So the Laugh Factory, it's 2 minutes of comedy to do a lottery, but they do this interesting thing at the Laugh Factory. This is in Hollywood. I don't know if it's at all Laugh Factories. It's probably not all Laugh Factories, but definitely the one in Hollywood, right off of Sunset Boulevard, which is right up the street from the Comedy Store and Hollywood Improv. So what they do is they say the first 10 comics to show up gets a guaranteed 2 minutes at the Laugh Factory. So what will happen is comics will literally start showing up around noon, and they will sit outside the Laugh Factory. I think the open mic starts at 5 or maybe 6 p.m., and they will wait for 6 hours to get a guaranteed 2 minutes. And by the way, you have to pay to get in. It's like $2. I mean, I think it is actually $2. So if you want a guaranteed spot at the Laugh Factory, you're literally sitting outside on Sunset, and I can't remember what the cross street is, in the middle of Hollywood, LA, outside in the sun, waiting in line at the Laugh Factory for hours and hours and hours. And by the way, I did that once. If you don't want to wait that long, well, then your second option is you just you still have to pay the $2, but then you put your name in the lottery bucket. So what they'll do is ultimately there's going to be about 20 comics who are going to get up and do 2 minutes. And so you can put your name in the lottery bucket and hope that you will get drawn. So there will be about 10 names. So there's the first 10 people that are guaranteed, and then there's probably another 30 or 40 comics who are putting their name in the bucket. All in the hopes that their name will get drawn, and then they'll get to do 2 minutes. And so I've done that mic a bunch of times too, where I didn't want to wait for 6 hours. So I just like, well, I'll just show up and put my name in the bucket. And I don't think I ever got called on the lottery. I don't think. Maybe I did once. I know I got called up, because I waited once. So I know I was one of the first 10 once. And so I definitely that was the first time I'd ever gotten stage time at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood was waiting outside. And then maybe one other time I got picked in the lottery. But I'd went a bunch of times where I didn't want to wait the 6 hours and didn't get called. So I'd pay $2. I sat there, and then you're just sitting there, and then they keep calling names, and you just hoping you'll hear your name. And then you got to sit there, and then they'll call up comic after comic after comic. And because it's an open mic, a lot of these comics are brand new, and they're just bad, and they aren't funny. And pretty much the only people in the audience are the other comics who are just resenting the fact that you're on stage and they aren't. So that's one open mic format. The other open mic format is just the good old sign-up list. So usually how that goes is they'll say like, all right, the open mic's going to start at 8. The sign-up is going to go up at 7. So at about 7 o'clock, so you have to show up an hour early. And then once the list is, whoever's hosting it will put the list out. Then there's just this bum rush for the list. And then comics are just signing up. And then the challenge is, how soon up the list can you get? So the sooner you get there, the higher you can get yourself on the list, which ultimately just means you don't have to wait as long. But what ultimately end up happening in those types of open mics is, you'll get 25, 30 comics who are all signing up. But now, since they know what order in the list they are, most comics will just leave. So they'll sign up, and once they know where they're at, I mean, if they're up front, then they'll stay, right? So let's say they're in the first five comedians. They know that they're going to go up, kind of close to the start of the mic. So the mic starts, those comics go up. Once they do their time, they just leave. So you've got 20, 25 comics all signed up, and after each comic goes up, the room gets smaller and smaller and smaller, because usually after comics do their time, they just leave. They just bounce. So that's a situation to where if you didn't show up, if you didn't show up on time, you could end up waiting 2-3 hours sometimes to get up on stage. So that's not fun. And then you have the bar mics that, they just throw an open mic in the middle of a bar that nobody wants. The bar patrons didn't even know it was going on. And, they're talking and drinking and there's TVs on and you're trying to do comedy and nobody's paying attention. And, you've got those formats. So there just really isn't a super great, some open mics, they do a better job than others. But most of the time it's, as a comic, you have to do something that is incredibly inconvenient, or you have to wait a really long time, or you have to pay a little bit of money, or you've got to, sit through hours and hours. And even if you do get up, the probability that you're actually going to get up in front of a welcoming, friendly audience is almost never. But, that's the price you have to pay to hone your craft in a saturated industry where there's thousands and thousands of comics who are all trying to be the next whoever they're trying to be, and, trying to get noticed, trying to get discovered, trying to hone material. And that is the price you have to pay. So what ends up happening is, again, this guy who I talked about, Joe Manente, he goes like, man, this is really inconvenient. I'm going to create an open mic format that is as comedic friendly as possible, with the understanding that most of these open mics don't have don't have actual audience members. People, like just regular people off the street who just want to go consume comedy, are not going to open mics. Because why would anybody want to consume 20 amateur comics for 3 hours? Nobody is going to sit through that. So he creates this format where he goes, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have a website where you sign up online before you even show up. The open mic is going to be 1 hour long, and here are the rules. You show up on time, you stay for everybody, you get 5 minutes, and you pay $5. That's it. So he creates this format, and it really takes off. It catches fire because you have so many comics who are going like, oh my gosh, this is such an easier way for me to practice material. Now, does it have its downsides? Sure. The one downside is you're pretty much performing for 9 other comics, because he would have 9 slots for the hour. So once those 9 slots filled up, that 1 hour open mic would be full. And so it's pretty much the 9 comics and then whoever's hosting it. So there's 10 comics there. And so you sign up online, you show up, you pay $5, you know what order you're going on, you know that you're going to have at least 9 other comics in the room who are going to serve as your audience while you're on stage. And then when they're on stage, you serve as the audience. And you get a rep in, you know exactly when it starts, you know exactly when it ends, you know exactly when you're going up, you know exactly what you're getting. And I totally latched on to that system. And so it just created a system where it was very convenient for me to do open mics and to hone my craft. And then what Joe started doing is he started doing that exact format, but he would do multiple hours a night. So you could do 3 or 4. You could sign up for multiple hours or multiple open mics every night. 2, 3, 4, 5 open mics. And so then it became really convenient because there's no way you're getting 5 open mics in a night in LA. No way you're getting 25 minutes of stage time anywhere, again, unless you're Bill Burr. So it just created this resource for comics like myself to really get a lot of reps in. And so when I moved back to Phoenix, I'm like, man, and I started doing open mics out here. I'm like, man, these open mics are so inconvenient. This is what I loved about that format over in LA. So I recreated it here. And so that is my open mic that I do on Sundays. So far we just have 1 hour. My goal is ultimately to start doing multiple hours, like they did in LA. So I did my open mic. I tried some brand new jokes that I just started, like that I literally wrote Friday night. If you watched my podcast yesterday, I talked about how I even talked about the premise and got criticized for it. And I'm like, you don't even know what I'm talking about. You have no idea what this is even supposed to look like. I'm just talking about the premise of it. So anyway, I tried some of that and I got some laughs. Now, anytime you get laughs at an open mic, there's always an asterisk, which is like comics. So again, this open mic, the only people I'm performing for are the other comics in the open mic. So comics, unfortunately, are not actually a super accurate litmus test. Comics can give you a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives. Meaning it is possible that they could be laughing at a joke that like normal human beings would not laugh at. Because us comics, we have maybe a tendency to have a little bit more of a warped, sense of humor. And because we hear so much comedy, it's a lot harder to shock us. So it's almost like you kind of have to shock us, or you have to be going for something really weird or different or whatever. Now, we do also laugh at normal stuff if it's presented really well. I mean, funny is funny ultimately. But I think if you look at the bell curve of maybe what normal human beings, even if there is such a normal thing, and we could get into demographics, we could get into how does certain material play, on a politically right-leaning audience or a politically left-leaning audience or an urban audience or a suburban audience, or would this play in the middle of the country versus the coast? I mean, like, sure. But let's just say in a bell curve, I think comedians have a tendency to maybe laugh at things that would actually be a lot more on the fringes, on the, on a few standard deviations out, both, again, for negative and positive. So, like, they may laugh at things that, again, are maybe not as funny to the general, like, normal public. And they will maybe also have a tendency to not laugh at things that the general public would love. Things that are maybe, like, if you want to call it hacky, I don't like using that word, but, more jokey type stuff. And it's like, yeah, comics hate that stuff because in general we hate that stuff, because we've kind of heard it all before. But that's actually what the public loves. And I've seen that so many times. I've seen that so many times with my own act. It's like I would go do a routine literally at an open mic and they would just stare at me like, who the heck is this guy? And then I would go headline with that material in Arizona the next weekend and would be killing it, right? So, again, I always take, comics response with a little bit of an asterisk, but it at least gets me on the right path of going like, okay, I got some laughs here. Now let's go see if I get laughs in front of an audience. And that is the case. So my new material seemed to go well. And I needed that a little bit, to be honest. After the open mic, I had a long conversation with a good comic friend of mine. His name's Cameron, and he was really great. Got a great energy, and he's a regular now at the open mic. He and I had a great conversation about just comedy in general, about my material, about what I'm going through, and how this year has really been a struggle for me to find sort of my next thing. Last year, I wrote a bunch of material that overall went really, really well, but it was coming from a much darker place it was a very real place, which I think is why it landed so well, is because I was actually being very vulnerable and very transparent. But it was also all about this pretty dramatic relationship that I had. And this year, I'm not coming from that point of view anymore. Like, I don't feel that darkness. I don't feel that bitterness. I mean, I'm sure I'm bitter, but but that's not what's driving me. That's not like my sort of general emotional constitution. So yeah, I'm really trying to find what my persona, what my voice is, where I'm coming from. Like, it's at a very fundamental level this year. Which is why I think I'm struggling so much, is because I don't actually know what that is. And it's shifted. And it's actually shifted to a place that I don't think I've ever really been in before in my comedy career. And so there's several elements going on here. There's like, when I'm doing a show, I have to entertain this audience. And so I need to do material that works, even if the place I was at emotionally when I wrote the material isn't really necessarily true anymore. I still have to sell the material. And again, I mentioned this before, because it's really hard to write material. Like, this doesn't just happen spontaneously. It takes months and months and months to even craft material that's presentable. So, for me to be starting that process over, and then to be also coming from a new point of view, having new, feeling a shift just in my psyche, in my emotions, where I'm coming from, having had healed a lot of the, that more kind of dark, painful place that I was at last year. And yeah, I'm trying to figure out, like, what's my truth. And I've talked about this a lot. Also, comedy isn't necessarily true, but there has to be an emotional resonance to what I'm saying, because that's actually what the audience is latching onto. They're not latching on to intellectual joke structure. It's an emotionally I mean, all art is that. All art is an emotional connection with the audience. So it's, how am I relating to the audience emotionally, and what is true for me emotionally that I can filter, that I can then use my words and my jokes and my stories to filter that emotional truth through. And I'm just really struggling to find it. And I feel like I made a little bit of headway at the open mic, though. So some of the newer stuff that I just started to write seem to go okay, or seem to go well. Again, it was comics, and there was only a few of them, so who knows? I could try that at a show again and just be right where I was a couple of weeks ago when I was trying new material in front of great audiences who it just overall it wasn't really landing with. Again, it wasn't bombing. It wasn't like it was awkward. I wasn't getting booed off stage. I wasn't getting heckled. I was getting laughs, and I got a couple big laughs, but it was, I mean, the routine as a whole was just not, again, coming, I think it's at the base level. I'm not even talking jokes. I'm not even talking, well, if I tweak the punchline, I'm just like, I got to find what my, the persona and the emotional truth that I'm coming from. So, but hopefully yesterday was an indication that maybe I'm finding another way to approach this, because that's what I tried to do. And then after the open mic, speaking of comedy, a good buddy of mine, another comedian and improviser named Dave Thurston, had an extra ticket to see Jim Bruer at the Mesa Center for the Arts, which happens to be right up the street from the neighborhood comedy theater. And so he and I went to go see Jim Bruer, which was amazing, because he's not a comic who I would have sought out to go see. But, you know, I know he's been an iconic performer, you know, ever since getting booked on SNL. And obviously, whatever he did to get booked on SNL, he obviously had to have turned a lot of heads to even get to that point. And had a great time. I laughed a lot at his comedy. I'm kind of a snob too, you know. It's hard for me just to sit there and enjoy comedy because I'm constantly analyzing everything that he's doing. And, you know, and I'm studying his persona and his joke structure and his connection and his confidence and his act outs and, you know, and then I also really start thinking about and visualizing, like, man, what would it be like if I was him? Like, how would I be responding to having this many people know who I am? I mean, he was in the large theater at Mesa Center. I think it seats 1,600. And had it pretty well sold out. I mean, there were kind of some empty seats scattered here, but I mean, it was a very, very full room. Carrie Lake showed up. Anybody who knows Arizona politics or Arizona news knows who Carrie Lake is. Oh my gosh, I should know this. Is she one of our senators now? Or is she running for senator? I'm sorry. I didn't live in Arizona for so long. I think she might be our senator. That should show you how much I care about politics. I don't even know who my senators are. I don't even know who to write if I have a complaint about something. I think she's one of our senators. So she walks in and people start applauding. So not only is she a senator, but she seems to be a popular senator, at least amongst Mesa, which I would assume is just indicative of a conservative, right-leaning audience. Because I think she's Republican. I think she was a big Trump supporter and supported the whole the election was stolen from him thing. Okay, you want to know what? That's not what this podcast is about. I don't even want to get into that because I don't want a bunch of comments. I'm not even going down that road. I'm just mentioning that she happened to be there and a lot of people were cheering that she was there. And then, yeah, Jim Bruer, you know, just masterful in his craft. He's so goofy. He has first of all, a great energy. He's very goofy, and I sort of miss that. He sort of has that kind of Jim Carrey, over the top, big movements, actor, you know, act outs, characters, sound effects, personifications, exaggerated, you know, he kept doing like this Satan thing, like, and all this stuff, you know. But with all of that, he was actually really talking about some pretty deep stuff. He actually did get into like the COVID stuff. He kept saying he's not political, and he was like, this isn't political. He's like, this is just me. How did he say it? Like, this is just logical. I'm just talking logical here. But it was clear that he was a little on the anti-government overreach side, you know, that the government overreached was the opinion he was expressing, which of course landed huge for a right-leaning, you know, conservative Arizona, you know, a Mesa, Arizona crowd. And then he did a whole thing about wanting to smoke weed, and that also landed just as well. And, you know, talked about marriage, you know, his marriage to his wife, and sort of, you know, that premises I think is pretty typical, you know, just sort of the, you know, trying to negotiate life with a woman, and he's sort of coming from the man point of view, but, you know, just did so in a very funny, you know, lighthearted way, talking about how his wife didn't want him to smoke weed anymore, but he liked to go down by the creek and smoke weed, and that his wife is a church-going Christian, but he's not, and that he likes to talk to God by the creek while smoking a little bit of weed. That is a huge summation, but that was like a 20-minute bit that had many tangents and funny offshoots, and act outs and characters and stuff. And, so he wraps up the show. He gets a standing ovation, and when everybody's standing, he said something at the very end, which I thought was really, really cool, is he just said, "Hey, everybody, thanks so much for coming out. I know that right now somebody in this audience just found out they had cancer, or somebody's parents, have failing health, or, said some sort of kind of third example of just sort of the tragedy. And he just said, we're all going through something difficult in life. We just need to love each other and support each other. It's not about politics. Don't listen." It's funny because he was kind of saying, don't listen to the politicians, even though Carrie Lake was right there. But, in essence saying, don't let the powers that be divide us and try to convince us to dehumanize each other. And just said, let's just love each other. And it was very genuine. It's very heartfelt. And I appreciated that because there's an element of that every time I try to do a performance. When I get up in my own head and my own ego and my own delusions of grandeur, I try to cut through all that and go, I'm here to perform, I'm here to entertain, and I'm here to make people laugh. And there's somebody in the audience right now who just got some crappy, shitty news, whatever it is they're going through, and they're like, I need some comedy tonight. I need to laugh. And they ended up in my comedy show, and now I'm on stage, and it's my opportunity to help that person laugh and forget about, for a little bit, for a brief moment, forget about whatever the crappy thing that's going on in their life is. And so I appreciated that he did that at, that's kind of his last little thing, after the, he ended up on a really funny bit, and then everybody's clapping and standing ovation, and then he just kind of said that as a last and final sign off. So had a great time with Jim Bruer. Super grateful to Dave for getting those tickets. And not gonna lie, as a dreamer, I would love it if something could happen in my life as a performer that would afford me the opportunity to perform in a venue like that, where that many people bought tickets to see me. Yes. And that's what makes me a dreamer, everybody. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I love all of you so much. I hope your dreams are going well. This has been episode 170 of the Paul Green Comedy Podcast on March 25th, 2024. I love you all so much, and I will talk to you tomorrow.